What's up, YouTube? We got a packed show today. We held a Twitter space on Sunday night. So we got a lot of questions from UVA fans about what we've been seeing during UVA fall camp, about NIL, and also about recruiting and what's next for Virginia football. But before we get going, why don't you go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell so that you're notified whenever there's a new video. And as you've been noticing, there's been a lot of new videos lately. And I expect more sights and sounds practice clips to be available in the next week. So go ahead and click that bell. But right now, let's get to the show. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Good Ole Podcast. I'm Jackie Francholi for Wahoo's 24/7. On this week's episode, I'm actually doing something a little bit differently. On Sunday night, we held a Twitter space to discuss what we have learned during fall camp and answer questions from the fans. So what I decided is to get that recording and make it available through here as well. So if you missed Twitter space or just don't have Twitter, you have the ability to listen into that conversation, listen into some of the answers that I had to some of those fan questions. So without further ado, here's this Twitter space that we had on Sunday night. All right, everyone, we'll just get started. If you want to ask a question, just let me know. Just message me or just let me know that you have a question by raising your hand or requesting to speak, and I will bring you on. So I felt like a lot of us here are curious about everything's going on with UVA football camp. It's been very fun covering them. I was not here for much of Bronco Mendenhall's tenure. I was just here for one season. So I don't have much to compare to how it was the previous staffs. But I was here under Mike London's tenure as well. And I've also covered, other teams like the Florida Gators and the Miami Hurricanes. It's been nice to see football back and just the energy that you see around grounds. It's been very, very energetic. And what I really like seeing when I walked in there on the first two practices was just the attention to detail that you see at fall camp. And these guys are very receptive to everything you see, and you see the coaching staff really taking in those details. So, that's the biggest takeaway I've seen from fall camp right now is everyone's open, and also just how much conditioning and how much nutrition has really affected their physicality and their body. You see Aaron Famui and you just go, man, that guy looks thinner but muscular at the same time. He's lost about 18 pounds, I think is what he said. So you just see how much these guys really work this off season. So I'm also bringing in OG Who here. Hold on, let me make sure to unmute him.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just picking up the groceries. I don't want to be all loud.
So I'm also going to bring in guys. If you have a question, I know here, Jeremy Lee, you have a question. So let's just start opening it up to people to get to talk here. Hi, Jeremy.
Hello.
Do you have a question for us about what
Oh, yeah. I just
camp or what's going on?
I mean, I did have a question. I just wanted to know what the energy was like, and if you're able to share any X's and O's kind of details. I'm very curious on what the defense might be looking like, just as far as like an alignment standpoint, if you have that kind of information.
Yeah, sure. So that's something that, if you go on Wahoo 24/7, we try to give a lot of the notes that we are able to see. We are only allowed the first about 30, 40 minutes of practice. We haven't really seen any 11-on-11 work. That's kind of still behind closed doors. But we do get to see a little bit of, right before stretching, we get to see them a little bit about who's running with the ones a little bit, who's running with the twos. So for the defense, we do see that they're running more with 5 DBs. That is something that they've spoken to a little bit about how they want to switch their scheme. So I wrote that on Friday evening, the 5 DBs that I saw kind of running together were like Anthony Johnson, Darius Bratton, Antonio Clary, Langston Long, and Cohen King were the guys that I saw running with the ones. So, and then you saw, guys like Mike Green and Jameer Carter and Ben Smiley. I saw them kind of rotated ones, and Josh Ahern, Nick Jackson were two of the linebackers that I saw rotated with the ones. With if I remember right, Hunter Stewart and James Jackson saw times with the twos, and then you had Cam Butler and Chico Bennett in that banded position, with Cam running with the ones and Chico Bennett running with the twos. Obviously, this is still, and Aaron Famui also ran with the ones. So obviously, they're going to rotate a lot, and that's something these guys were talking about. Is they wanted to get depth in those positions, especially in the front, defensive front. And when you look at that, I think that's actually going to be a strength on this team if you see just the talent that they have on the defensive front and what the guys that are returning, what they've been able to do in the offseason with their bodies and just mentally. Talking to Ben Smiley, for instance, after practice on Wednesday, you just seen how mentally he said he's gotten stronger. He had dealt with a lot of adversity during his time at UVA, and he finally feels healthy, finally feels good. So when I look at that depth chart, I really like what you see on that D line. That's something that I made a note on Friday. And what I said early when we just started, you see the details that these coaches are working on. And it's not just, Coach Cox is not just working with DBs and Coach Slade's not just working with, the defensive ends. When they go into these individual drills, these coaches are working with several different position groups. So they're working on hip placement, looking on foot placement, working on how you should tackle with how you should lean your shoulder. It's just those little minute details that will matter when you're working on tackling, for instance. This is something that a lot of you have made a note of it during last season. So yeah, so there's a lot of good things when you look on the defensive side of the ball, because that's obviously a big question from last year. But I think I'm not as concerned with the defense. I know a lot of people will say, well, we looked at numbers last year. But again, the defense last year, I felt like had talent, but the personnel was placed in the wrong position to succeed. They were moving to a different scheme, and they didn't have the personnel correct for that scheme. So I think a lot of it was placed on the players, and they were saying there was this misassignment, but I think to the detriment of last year's team, I think the scheme was just way too complicated. At the same time, the personnel they didn't have the personnel to run that scheme. I think this year, what I do like is the way that they're approaching with the personnel that they have is putting these guys in positions to succeed. You always want to look at the athletes that you have, and they're not forcing guys in position. Like guys that I felt were more recruited as edge rushers in the previous staff weren't in their prime position to succeed. They were kind of going more inside, and that was a struggle with them because they had to learn a different skill set they might have been comfortable with. I'm curious to see what this staff does with certain those guys that are recruited as edge rushers, but not necessarily were placed in those positions. The guys like Deshaun Perry, for instance. So, yeah, I think that's the big thing, and I think there is a lot of talent on this team, a lot of young talent. Guys like James Jackson, guys like Langston Long, guys like Hunter Stewart. I feel like those are the guys that I'm really curious to see how they do this year, and guys that have been kind of lurking in the background. Like I said, Ben Smiley has been getting rave reviews by staff members. And I think those are the guys that I'm really curious to see how they developed in the offseason, not just physically, I think mentally. I think a lot of it, they went through COVID, the pandemic. They went through a period of time where they couldn't visit families. A lot of stuff, they had a lot of mental strain placed upon them. These are young men that had a lot kind of thrown at them in the last few years. So it'll be interesting to see how this all comes together this year, and a lot of good things I've been hearing. And obviously, it's only been two practices that we've been able to see, but you can already tell some of the energy difference. And I was watching them like I'm tired just by seeing them run one side or the other, and you can see that they really like that energy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I agree with you about the talent level. I think the talent has always been there. I just don't think it's been utilized in the correct way. So hopefully Coach Elliott and staff can make that happen this year.
For sure. Yeah, there will be I think all of us just wanted to play a football game for the Richmond game to see how everything goes along. But Tremaine, I know you have a request here. Let me allow you to talk here.
I ask a quick question. I'll go ahead and throw it out there because I know somebody about to ask, but I'm gonna ask before you. Anything with the offensive line you got to give us? And then number two, any, you know what I'm saying, any first years you talk to, how those guys getting acclimated to grounds and, the system and everything.
Well, for first thing, it's just nice seeing bodies on the O line after the spring. Man, you know, kudos to Coach 2J. Man, it must have been hard to seeing that O line with so many injuries in the spring. And I think at the end of the day, it was probably around 7 or 8 healthy linemen in the spring. Um, so it was tough for everyone to really grade the O line with just so many injuries to that group. But, I think, talking to Joe Josie, for instance, which I shamed for him for having hot sauce in his smoothie. A
That
man
is
should not put hot sauce in his smoothie. I shamed him quite stale when I saw him after practice.
hey,
But
that's some
apparently he said
wild
it adds
stuff.
flavor. I don't know.
I'll take his
Um,
word for it. That's some wild stuff right there.
yeah, that I told him the only time I've added something that's strange is when I was pregnant with my first, where I put maple syrup on fried cod. That's as far as complicated in that, and I blame the pregnancy on that. But no, the O line, when you look at the O line, I think what a lot of people don't realize when you look at the O line, yes, they don't have much game experience. Yes, they lost a lot. And Tony Elliott said it perfectly. The, he wished he had more time to recruit those players, or he had an ability to recruit those players a lot more to stay. But even some of those guys just wanted to go play back home, like Ryan Swoboda. He just wanted to go play back home. So I don't know how much you would be able to convince those guys to stay. They got the extra COVID year. Why not play by family? But they do have a lot of players in that room that, yes, they didn't have game experience, but they have experience in the college program. They also have experience playing under players that were great at their positions. They also know Coach 2J, and they know his coaching style. And I think Noah Josie said it perfectly because Coach 2J remained and they understood what certain lingo and certain language that the new staff were saying. They understood a little bit better because Coach 2J can be their translator for them, basically. He said Coach 2J was acting as their translator, where Brendan Armstrong said it the same thing as the kickoff. The biggest challenge was learning the lingo that this new staff was coming in compared to what the older staff is more NFL lingo. So Noah was saying that 2J allowed a better transition because when the new staff said this, then they would turn to 2J. It's like, this is what we used to call it. And it's a little easier for that transition. Jonathan Leach is one that has been steady praise from several of the staff members, and Logan Taylor as well is another guy. It's been, guy that's been consistently been talked about. I'm interested to see how much John Paul Flores features in. He, he's one that Coach 2J, when I asked him at the media event that we had, is one guy that he said that, is really open to learning, and he was always asking about plays, and he's an intelligent guy, high football IQ. So I would think that he could be a guy that could be a swing guy in different positions. I know they're probably working for him in different positions. You need to do that when you're trying to figure out who your 8, 9, 10 guys are. Tony Elliott and 2J said they're confident for about 8 right now, and they're looking for more depth as you go further along. So for the lineman that was rolled with the ones on Friday. Now, again, I mentioned Leach and Taylor, but those two are wearing a yellow jersey over a green jersey on Friday, so they're not going to be in the ones that I'm going to list right now. Doesn't look like their injuries are that strenuous. I think it's mostly out of caution. Concerning guy Logan Taylor is coming off of injury. And it looks like from what I can tell, most guys in green jerseys alone were coming back from an injury, and the guys with the yellow were still wearing pads, but they weren't participating in all the drills. So I don't think this is going to be a worry for injury, but we do get Tony Elliott on Monday evening, so we can ask him about those guys and see if they're back and playing with the team. But the ones that I saw were Charlie Patterson, Noah Josie, Ty Furnish, Derek Devine, and John Paul Flores, where the guys are rolling with the ones during the drills that we were able to see. And then some of the first years there, as far as the O line, Dawson Alters was getting a lot of praise by Coach Tujay. He was getting coached up, and Tujay was praising him a lot. First year, we're not allowed to talk to first years on campus, on grounds, the first year. But Steve Bracey has been one that I've been hearing a lot about. Obviously, he's a mid-year enrollee. Nick Jackson joked with me in ACC kickoff that he's keeping him on his toes. And when you see him, it's kind of, when you look at him, you're like, is this a first year?
Yeah, he's a grown man.
Doesn't look like a first year. He's built a little thicker than you would imagine of a first year, and I think it's just like someone went into a lab and made a clone of Nick Jackson and said, "Here he is." So yeah, he's definitely one that I'm curious to see how he develops and how much he will actually have an impact this year. And I see Will Bettridge there on our space. I think I would be shocked if he doesn't feature this year either as well. So yeah, I think that's the two that I would kind of keep an eye on right now. But yeah, a lot of, it's a shame that Dakota Tweedy is still recovering. I was curious to see if he was able to get healthy enough to practice. I think he was going to be my sleeper for an impact player because he's such a talented guy. Even though there was a crowded wide receiver room, I thought he could sneak in a few reps here and there. But it's yeah, I think that's all. The O-line is definitely got more bodies there, which is nice. And the first years, it's tough coming in if your first couple of practices with that type of speed and how they transition very quickly. But they're putting nose to the ground and working. I got if you look at our sights and sounds, you see some Xavier Browns there, and you see some clips of him, and that guy is a speedy dude. He'll be fun to watch during his college career. But Tremaine, I got you on there. What question do you have?
Hey, Jay, how you doing?
Good.
What's up, dog?
What's up, man? How's everybody doing? So I can't remember if it was something I was watching on a YouTube ESPN thing or ESPN podcast, but someone was talking about how they saw Virginia as a sleeper, it's like one of those teams that people aren't really talking about, but you better be careful. And I know it's been early, just a few practices, but would you somewhat agree with that assessment just based off some of the things that you saw at practice? Do you think that we're a team people aren't really talking about, but they probably should?
I thought that even before fall camp started, just because of the way the schedule lines up. When you look at the schedule and you look how the schedule starts off with it, when you have an O-line that needs time to gel, I mean, the way they start is what any first time head coach wants. You start off with Richmond, you go to Illinois, home at Old Dominion, hold it away at Syracuse and at Duke. Las Vegas said Virginia is a 7.5. I think is the prediction that they had for UVA. I can see that as the minimum between 6 and 7. But I can see them winning 9 games. That's something that I've done the prediction. Actually, OG and I did a prediction podcast together, and I can see them, being, let's see, 1, 2, 3, maybe a 5-0 to start the year. And then in my prediction story that I'm actually writing, I had their first loss coming in the homecomings against Louisville. So I can see that type of start and giving the O-line a chance to breathe and just getting adjust because, again, like I said earlier, I think the defense is going to be better than what people assume because they do have the talent on that side of the ball. And obviously, if you look at the offense, there's a lot of great skill players there that are returning. Obviously, you have Brennan Armstrong. And if you ever had an O-line and needed time, what you would need is a guy like Brennan Armstrong to give you a little extra oomph there, and having a guy that can release the ball as quickly as Brennan can, and having guys like Octavian Wicks and Lavelle Davis who can make plays happen, or Keaton Thompson. Those are the type of players that can make a difference for you when you're trying to adjust to an O-line. And then obviously you can play around with your play calling when it comes to trying to cover maybe some discrepancy on the O-line. I remember covering Dan Mullen's first season, and they were playing against Mississippi State at Mississippi State, which was one of the best D-lines in the SEC at that point. And then University of Florida's O-line was having the same type of problem. They were kind of in a trying to, I guess, rebuild phase. Again, Denman at that point came into a situation where they didn't recruit. Jim McElwain's staff didn't recruit O-lines as well, and they were able to kind of play around that defensive line and make him obsolete because the way they had their play calling, they did short passes to the outside, and they were able to kind of, I guess, not show their weakness. And they were able to kind of go around that Mississippi State defensive line, and they beat Mississippi State on the road that day. So there are ways to play call around your O-line just for until they gel, and that's something that Florida did during that season, and he did it very well. So that's why I think the O-line should be okay, especially with how the season begins. So I can see UVA being the sleeper this year just because of the talent that they have on this team that a lot of people forget because they have this, about the O-line question. Let's look at defensive stat from last year. But I think when you look at the schedule, you can see why people said they can be a sleeper.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Tremaine, you seen them jerseys, man? You seen them edited jerseys?
Man, I told Jackie, I said she need to make sure them blacks become a reality. Now, you don't get to tease me.
Man,
like
that got me good. I was so excited for some black jerseys. I saw that, and then I went on Instagram, and I'm like, I need to see if I can copy these. I want to see what filter they use
Man, they had me all
fool
on
me
Bleacher
that.
Report looking silly. I can't believe they did that to me.
Oh, OG was excited, boy.
I was like, we won. We finally won. They got me though. That's good stuff right there.
And you don't think they'll have orange ones at all? You don't think they'll do any orange helmets or anything like that, Jackie?
I'm not sure. I just know there's some. I've been hearing little things saying there's going to be exciting alternates this year. I don't know the details of it. I just know there's something exciting happening this year. I've joked like, okay, so maybe the black jerseys can come. They're like, I think a lot of people are more focused on the traditional looks, which actually I really like the fact that they are paying like homage to the traditional looks. I think it kind of follows what you think of Tony Elliott building the foundation and bringing the alums back. So I kind of get the strategy there. So yeah, I think I understand why the traditional look. So and there's something going to happen. That's all I've been told, but I haven't told any specifics.
Okay, gotcha. Do you see? Do you feel like with the coming of the new football facility, do you see that as already starting to be a positive impact with recruiting with this new coaching staff?
I think having facilities was always going to help. I think, once they had their first big official visitor weekend actually in June, a few days after they had that groundbreaking. And I asked a few of those players, and a few of those players did say, like, having that there did show them, like, for example, Miles Green was during that first official weekend. And he said, yeah, it shows that, he said, Tony Elliott got there and, look at that. They're having a groundbreak. Things are moving forward. They're showing that, they're investing in my future if I decide to go. At this point, he didn't commit to UVA. This was before his visit, and I was talking to him before his visit. So then after his visit, I asked him again, and he said the same thing. It's not going to be this, like, light switch or this thing that says, oh, we have UVA's facilities. You're going to win all these battles. That's not how it works. But it's one less thing that College A and College B can tell recruits that UVA doesn't have. I think that's the big thing is you're always going to have teams negatively recruit you. So you're trying to figure out a way not to have stuff for other teams to do and also show them, like, listen, to parents and to these guys saying, listen, we're investing in your future. This is what UVA is bringing. Not only are we going to invest in your future on the academic side and on your career side, what you want to do future, like Tony Elliott's saying, it's not a 4-year decision, it's a 40 decision, but we're also showing you what we can do football wise and having these facilities. And one thing that that you can tell from the players and what Tony Elliott was saying, that he wanted to do some changes facilities wise by adding more nutrition aspects to it. And even now, even before facilities, got started in construction, he's doing nutrition as emphasis in the off season. All the guys I've spoken to, Ben Smiley, Noah Josie, all those, Lavelle Davis, they all mentioned the same thing. The nutrition has drastically changed at UVA and how they approach it with Coach Smo at strength and conditioning. So this is only can help them, but it's not the cure all. It's just going to be one more thing that they could advertise for these guys that are coming on grounds. But at the same time, it's, Coach College A and College B can't use it against you. Um, so it does have an impact, but I'm always the person that says facilities is great, but when everyone else already has one, it's not going to be a positive for you. It just doesn't it's not a negative anymore. And Warren, let me get you on here. All right, Warren, you're good to go if you want to go.
I did. You kind of touched on it a little bit. I want you to speak more to the strength and conditioning and nutritionists. What you see, I think it has been a great transformation of the kids' bodies and what they're able to do. So, could you speak more to that, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually trying to work on doing a story on this because it's not, when you walk in and you see just, Mike Hollins and how his body's changed. Antonio Clary is probably it looks the best I've seen him. I remember seeing him in the spring and he's lost so much weight and he had such discipline to get how his body changed through the last few months. And a lot of them have said they just, I think Lavelle Davis put it the best in the spring. He said that before he would only focus on what he was eating or what he was doing strength conditioning wise when he was hurt. It was like mentally, yes, he would want to get his body right for the season, but he wasn't as focused in on every day to prevent those injuries. It was like there was this disconnect in his mind of what to do before the injury. He would do everything for the season, but he wouldn't do everything about now. For example, focusing on hydration, for instance. And then now, when I spoke to him on Wednesday after the first practice, he's like, "Oh, now I'm just focusing on getting my body right, but I'm doing everything as I wouldn't say preventable for injuries, preventing injuries." But he was saying like, "I now understand what my body needs." To get it right, hydration is key. I know Coach Elliott said some of the guys were cramping. They were going to talk to them about how they handle hydration, but that is a big key. Again, when I was covering University of Florida, obviously that was the home of Gatorade, and they made that their biggest emphasis when I was there. That was such a big part of their whole thing was the nutrition aspect. And obviously they had such a big backer in Gatorade since it was created at that school. And that's what UVA is doing, is trying to kind of marry nutrition and strength and conditioning. And you can see how much has already helped just with these guys being able to go through this practice. And the practice is very different than what it was previously. It's just the pace of the practice. It's never stopping. These guys go from drill to drill. And the pace is quite extreme, especially in the heat too. So conditioning is definitely improved with this. So I'm curious. I'm trying to kind of get a better story on this to kind of see how the differences are. But I like the fact that the players are saying they're not just being told, they're understanding how they need to kind of operate with their bodies and eating and strength and conditioning so that they prevent injuries, which again, in a season that's hard like college football, you want to have that.
So a second part to that is the mental health, and you kind of touched on it from the group that came through the COVID, which was something that wasn't normal. So any conversations, anything you're hearing in reference to that?
Yeah, actually, I talked to Keaton a little bit about that during ACC kickoff. Keaton is one of the players that really kind of focused in on that. He said he was something that as a leader, he wants to make people aware that it's okay to talk about things that if you're struggling. And Carla Williams touched on that as well during the day of the groundbreaking for the facilities, is that UVA just added a third sports psychologist. And I actually talked to Becca Jarrett from the women's soccer program, and she was talking about that as well, that UVA is putting this focus on mental health. And I think it's something that is lost in a lot of, talk about, physical health and how they're doing conditioning. And I think there's been a bigger focus on the off season this year. And like you mentioned, and it's a lot of these student athletes didn't have the normal college experience for at least a year, maybe even two. So I think there needs to be a focus on their mental health. And honestly, I've covered recruiting since 2013, and what these players went through in 2013 to what these players go through now is very different. You talk to, some of these high school athletes, and the amount of stress that they go to as 17, 18, 19-year-olds with the recruiting environment that has developed and changed over the past year is insane. I was talking to one of the players I covered recruiting in like 2014, 2015, and he was saying, his cousin who's going through recruiting process now. He was saying, like, I don't know how these guys handle it now. This was a former 4-star player. He said, like, seeing my cousin how he's going through now, I would be extremely stressed with the amount of DMs he gets. He's saying, like, it's on DMs, it's Facebook messages, it's TikTok, it's all these things that's going on, and it's definitely a different stressor. So having a school really focus on mental health is really crucial, and especially with a lot of the news that we've seen with some of the stuff going around with student athletes. So it's nice to see that going on.
Thank you.
What's up, Mr. Stewart? How you doing, big dog?
What's up, family? You better slow down.
Yep, back to work tomorrow now. And I done had a full day's rest. I'm good to go.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
Yeah, I miss the beach. I miss being in Outer Banks.
Right.
But Mike, let's get you on here. Hi, Mike. How's it going? Mike, you're good to go if you want. All right. So, anyone have any other questions? You want to talk about fall camp?
Any recruiting news? I saw
Hello?
we just lost another battle.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, I'm
You want
sorry.
to go ahead, Mike?
Somehow I thought the mic was on, but it wasn't. No, I know we talked about recruiting a little bit, but I thought we could dig into it a little more. Carla has done an excellent job filling in income for a lot of the different areas. You touched on nutrition, strength and conditioning. I know we've added some additional guys, folks to the recruiting staff, in-house recruiting staff, but we still trail badly in terms of money that's invested in recruiting. Clemson is spending more than, I believe, $2.2 million. We may be right around $1 million. I know Florida State's over $2 million. Carolina and the others are well into the millions, close to $2 million. That's the thing that concerns me most. I know these guys work hard, but they need the resources too. Does Tony talk about that? Because he's coming from a school that spent a ton of money in supporting recruiting. We don't have that kind of budget, and that might be the difference between 6, 7, and 8 wins as opposed to 7, 8, or 9.
Great question.
Yeah, and I think Tony hasn't talked about it. That's not something that he has addressed right now. That what he's been addressing is basically building in-state relationships again, and recruiting the right athlete that fits the UVA mold, because you have to recruit a specific type of athlete, which is hard at times to find that right fit to UVA. You have to have a specific criteria. I want to say for Virginia. I think the first couple of months for this staff was going to be acclimate to who to approach and who not to approach. And I think until UVA's budget when it comes to recruiting is increased, because at the end of the day, you're going to need more money to recruit these guys, especially with the way the transfer portal is, until they figure out any transfer deadlines or and things like that, transfer windows like they do for the EPL and European soccer. They're going to be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And which is insane, because those guys still have lives and family, and they deserve to see their family at some point. And so with them, it's just allocating your resources as effectively and as smart as possible until you have the the additional budgetary resources that you need. And I think there are a lot of little things that are helping them. Again, it's all right now. UVA is at a point where you don't want to be negatively recruited. And again, having the facilities a groundbreaking, huge step forward because you want to show the schools, like for example, you're competing against schools like Wake Forest and Duke. You're competing against Stanford. You're competing against you're competing against Virginia Tech. You want to show these student athletes that you're invested in their future. So again, you have the facilities. That's one less thing that they can negatively recruit. And that's how you should approach your recruiting right now. And obviously relationships. Yes, you want to recruit in state, in which they're trying. They're trying to go back in state and growing the relationships, and that's honestly where they have to start. And you're seeing that. You're seeing, Miles Green from Highland Springs. He committed to Virginia, and those are the things that you want. Go into the DMV. Go into Northern Virginia. Go back to Virginia Beach. Go into the 804 in Richmond. And recruit in those areas, but start off with that because you're not going to get $1 million overnight. So this is how you approach recruiting right now, and just work on those relationships, work on those contacts for a little while, and until you can. I don't know if you ever can catch up because when you catch up, the other teams just get more money. So I don't know if this arms race is ever going to be something that you fully catch up in. But it's just how you effectively use what you have.
I get that. I understand that part. The only thing that I'm most concerned about, we're going to have a really nice facility, but in order to effectively run it, a good organization and good operation, you need operational money annually. And this school, unfortunately, my school tends to be a little cheap when it comes to investing in sustainable recurring income for football. We've got a lot of great sports, and I want to keep that. But I'm just really afraid that we're not going to give Tony everything he needs operationally in terms of revenue in order to do what he needs to do. That's my biggest concern.
I think that's a valid concern, but at the same time, you would hope that with everything that's going around in college football and the stuff with realignment and what's going around just with the changes there, you would hope that if certain things were to happen and different conferences come into play, or if it's not the ACC anymore or something goes along there, that they can see what type of environment that UVA will placed under, because you don't want to be also embarrassed in the national stage. So you're hoping that those in charge of the pocketbooks, as you would say, would also kind of see what needs to be done. And also, at this time, Bronco was great at a lot of things. He was not the best fundraiser.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have a guy like Tony Elliott, who's a very approachable guy, who is really well liked by a lot of people, and he's got a very a personality that is intriguing, a personality that people really like. That's very different when you're trying to fundraise for a program, when you're trying to meet. So that could be a change too, and especially if they have a good season this year. Again, we look back at what the schedule looks like. If they have a really good season this year, just gives that oomph to the program. That could certainly help. So maybe I'm a glass half full person, but that's what I would think. There's might be hope down the future if they can work that Tony Elliott charm a little bit. They can show what the landscape of college football can look like.
Yeah, I know that the in-house recruiters and the recruiting coordinators, they met as a collective group. I think they have an association. I think that happened a few weeks ago. One of the things that came out of that meeting was they're going to propose to the transformation committee of the NCAA for the reconstitution of the organization for in-house recruiters to be able to go on site to meet recruits. That would help the coaches, but it also adds an interesting element to it. Staffs like Georgia, they've got 30 or 40 in-house recruiters. They can flood, and the same thing could be said with some of the programs in the ACC. They could flood the different markets with people on the ground that we can't compete against. So that's going to be something that we need to keep an eye on. Certainly, I know Tony's certainly aware of it, that it could be a possibility, but that's what we're up against.
Yeah, it's certainly one to watch. When you look at UVA's recruiting office, those guys work hard. But when you look at, for example, University of Florida, Billy Napier, I think his staff was like over 50 people compared to every it's a struggle when you look at the other conferences and what their budgets look like for the recruiting stuff. But yeah, college football is changing a lot, and look at what UVA's recruiting office looks so much differently than it did just under Mike London. I think Blanda did a lot of stuff. The guy had to do a lot of stuff back in 2013 for one guy to do, and look, you're a few years later, and you've got I think a handful of guys in the scouting office, and you've also got Justin Sparrows, you got Lindsay, you got several people on the recruiting staff, you got Savannah 2J, so you've got Summer 2J, excuse me, you've got several different people working in that recruiting office. You got Katie Justo for on-campus recruiting. So you got so many different people that, in 10 years ago, that would never been at UVA. Always at one or two people.
Yeah.
So they are adapting. It might be a little slower, but they are adapting. So that's your hope there.
Yeah. Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate that.
No problem.
So to that point, Mike brings up some good business points, and I know he's plugged in on that side. And I wanted to ask the question in reference to NIL. Have you heard anything? Do we have focus groups that focus on some of these weak areas that we're trying to thrive in?
Yeah, I think UVA. I talked to a lot of Cavalier Futures. That's who the NIL and Hooks Marketing. Those are the two that I've talked to, and they're going. I think with the NIL is it's such a strange environment for UVA, because UVA, and especially because they're in the state of Virginia, which has their own different laws compared to, for example, Florida, which is one of the first few states to allow for players to have, name, image, and likeness. And you've got schools like in Louisiana and California, or to the high school athletes can make money as well. So UVA is in a position where they're trying to navigate in a world where there's no uniformity. And I think they're moving in the right direction. And I think with NIL, I always say the first year or two is going to be havoc and chaos. And I think a lot of the student athletes are trying to navigate their way around it too. But I think a lot of it is going to even themselves out within maybe 4 to 5 years, because this is where I'm thinking in 4 or 5 years time. I think that, let's say John Smith gets a 6-figure sum by signing with this school, and he's there and he's playing, but he doesn't play his freshman year. He doesn't play his sophomore year. He's just got 6 figures to sit on the bench and being third on the depth chart and not seeing any game time. Will those people who funded for him to come early be more, willing to spend that money again for another recruit to sit and not play? And then these players, for instance, this is one thing that you're going to see is maybe adjust to the market. Is some of these players are going to think, I'm going to get this big amount of money to go to school early on, but then I don't have what's next for me. If I don't go to NFL, I don't have that long-term money. So I think they're going to see some of that adjust in the market too for NIL. I think UVA is doing certain things and navigating it. Would you want them to do more? Sure, but they're also tied, because technically Tony Elliott can't be involved in anything NIL-wise. It has to be from the outside. So you're talking about Charlotte's local businesses, and this is where Cavalier Futures, having that collective has certainly helped things along. Having a guy like Brennan Armstrong having a deal with the local McDonald's is certainly something that helps with NIL. You're never going to compete with Texas A&M NIL. You're never going to compete with even Florida NIL. But it's getting to the right direction. I think a lot of these guys are trying to, I talked to, one of the student athletes, and he says, I'm not really interested in NIL right now. I'm just going to see what happens. So I think they're doing enough to explore that. Could they do more? Yes. But again, there's only so much the university itself can do, because they can't really actually help broker any deals. But there's things happening around the school, like Cavalier Futures, that is certainly helping. And Tony.
Hey, Jackie, thanks. A couple things. Recruiting wise, people always talk about what Virginia is doing recruiting wise. I don't think people really ever understand that it's not an even playing field when it comes to recruiting the UVA athlete and other athletes. You look at maybe 4 or 5 of the top guys in Virginia have already signed with Virginia Tech. Virginia has a couple, but there are a lot of guys that want to come to the university, and we can't get them in. Quite plain and simple. Folks, that's not something that they publicize, but it's a reality. A lot of guys that want to come to Virginia can't get into Virginia. They end up signing with Virginia Tech, and they're talented guys. But it takes a certain type of athlete to be able to handle the rigors of academics at UVA. UVA doesn't care what type of athlete you are. You have to be able to perform academically, or they'll put you out. The best example I can give you for that is Chris Warren. Chris Warren was runner-up rookie of the year when he was at Virginia. The next year, he was at Ferrum because Virginia was like, yeah, you're not handling academically, you got to go. And so that if that doesn't tell you a lot about the focus on academics at our university, then you just will never get it. When it comes to the NIL piece, to your earlier point, we will never, ever be able to compete with those other universities who have been doing it under the table for years. And now they have it where they can just flat out pay guys. UVA, look, if you want to come and play football at UVA, then you're the type of person that want to come and play football at UVA. I love what they're doing. They're being strategic about the NIL because I am a firm believer as a former player that guys should get paid for their name, image, and likeness, but I don't agree with how it's being used now at other universities because that portrays the whole meaning behind making sure that we're taking care of the players. It's unrestricted free agency, and there's no rules. At least the NFL has rules. This has no rules about it right now. So it's really getting away from what it should be about. And that is really, really disconcerting. When it comes to Tony Elliott and him developing the program that he wants to develop, I am so optimistic and so excited for him and this staff because he's going to do it the right way. He has the pedigree. It's going to take him a little bit of time. Eventually, I think the donors will come around because of the enthusiasm that he is bringing. I hope I'm not wrong, and I don't think I am. And it's between he and Carla, who knows how to build a program, because that Georgia experience for her, she's doing it the right way. She's bringing on the right people. And so it has been great to talk to Tony and him tell me, Cove, I need you, because I asked him flat out, what do you need from us as alumni? And he said, I need you guys to be around this program. I need you guys here. These kids need to see what legacy is like. They need to know the history, and they'll only know that if you guys are around. You guys are sharing the story. You guys are talking to them about what they need to do to get to the next level. And everybody's not going to be a pro athlete, but at least to have you guys around and them see that, you come with a credibility that they can appreciate because you've walked these grounds, you've played on this field, you wear that orange and blue and you love it. They need to understand exactly what that is. And that is the charge that he has put before the alumni. And I said, Coach, I understand the assignment. And so I want to make sure that I'm assisting both he and Carla in any way that I can to get guys back to trumpet and talk about everything that's positive about this university and having the donors understand it. I think Carla gave the best messages, because everyone, all the donors, they love all of those Olympic sports that we have, that we're getting all those NCAA championships in. But if you don't have football as a positive force at the university, those sports go away. And when she said that, I was like, it could not have been said any better. So my hope is that winning will cure all. I think that he's doing it the right way. I can't wait for this program to win and be successful this season. I know that he will, and we're going to do everything that we can to support him to that end.
Tony, that's well said. If I could just reiterate, Jackie, that one of the things that I believe is going to help Tony is how much money we've put into academic support. One of the problems that Al Groh's era had was that we weren't putting that kind of money into academic support, and we lost a lot of top kids who couldn't stay in school. That's not happening as much anymore. And because of that, I think that's going to help at least the foundation of the football program under Tony grow, because I know that was very important for Bronco. And as long as we keep putting the kind of resources in academic support, then we can get in some of the kids that may be on the border, but even borderline kids can be really academic up, coached up in order to perform at UVA. So what Tony just said is spot on. We've got to be able to get kids that can stay in school, but we got to have the resources to keep them there.
For sure. And actually, that a lot of recruits that I've talked to, specifically one this year, said that that's something that he's worried about when, he had the grades. He had no grade issues going in, but that's something that he kept looking for was, how can I be okay at school when my schedule is so insane with football season and even in the spring with practice? How can I juggle with it? What's the academic support? So kids do want to see that. That's not something that is tossed around to say. Some kids do express that fear of failing in the classroom because they're going to be inundated with so much work. So that is something that is discussed among parents and kids as well. And kind of going with, what Tony was saying was, I think there's got to be some patience when it comes to Tony Elliott and his staff, just kind of assimilating with everything that's going on and just figuring out what works and doesn't work at UVA. Because again, you're working at different resources that he was accustomed to in Clemson, but also they came in, especially on the recruiting front, they came in so behind with 23 because don't forget when Tony Elliott was assembling his staff, he was worried about trying to field an O-line. So he was recruiting the O-linemen for 22 when other staff members were recruiting 23 and 24s. So that's why when it comes to 23, some of the guys that committed were a little bit, they offered in the spring, which is something that if you were on Wahoo's 24/7 message boards, I kept saying, watch out for those guys. They are evaluating in the spring and watch out for those new offers because that's some of the guys that they're going to be keying on pretty heavily in the summer. And we saw some of those guys visit. So I think when you look at him, you really should really start grading their efforts in 24 and 25 because then they had a couple months in the game, a year or so in the game where they can get those in-state relationships going and kids can see how their film looks like because the kids want to know how the football program is going to look under them and see what's next after Brendan Armstrong. So a lot of those stuff will be able to answer in that way. So that's why I always tell people, yes, you're looking at 23. You're looking at the wins and losses head to head of what's going on with who's getting this recruit and with that recruit. Focus on the long-term goal here because you have to see what's going on in 24 and 25 as well to really evaluate this staff. So again, just having a little bit of patience. And speaking of patience, Ryan, you've been pretty patient waiting to speak. So go ahead, Ryan.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. I am 10 years old and a 4-year season ticket holder. With Tony Elliott wanting a more balanced offense, what is your thoughts of the running back unit? Who do you see as the primary running back so far?
Well,
future media star right there.
Yes,
future
media star. Actually, that's the question that we asked Coach Kitchings on Friday. And he said there's no one leading the pack right now. I think that was a little bit of a challenge to Mike Collins. They've been not shy about challenging Mike. He said it best. He said that these coaches came in and they've been working him hard. When I talked to Coach Gaither, he said that, Mike wasn't a D1 running back when he first saw him. And he said, you got to improve yourself as a running back. And when we saw him practice on Wednesday, what I really liked was they were doing this footwork drill, but Coach Gaither was on him and helping him position his arm and ball correctly. Like his arm was moving away from his body, and when he was doing that, obviously, if someone came in and knocked the ball, it'll be easily a fumble. And you see Coach Gaither going to him and pushing his arm down, trying to show him, like, put that ball back in there, put it next to your body. So that's how much they've been kind of hounding Mike to kind of, get him ready for the season, because unfortunately, Ronnie Walker is not going to be available probably until late September. And unfortunately, Devin Darrington was denied another year by the NCAA because technically he didn't play during the COVID year because of Harvard, which is hard. I still don't understand that decision. But anyways, he couldn't get that COVID year. So they had to bring Cody Brown in from University of Miami. Everything I've heard about Cody is that he's a great running back. He was just buried in a depth chart, but he still needs to work on his body. And that's what he did. He needs to get his body right for the season. He needs to work on his conditioning. He needs to just get ready for the season. And unfortunately, he didn't get at UVA until the summer. So he's going to need some time to get used to everything and assimilate. So I still imagine Mike Collins would be your number one guy, maybe Paris Jones here. But it's going to be a play position battle going through the fall camp, and it'll be interesting to see how that position battle goes through. We'll see how, Tony Elliott challenged him again in the first practice, and we'll see Tony Elliott on Monday. So we'll see what he says. But yeah, great question, because everyone wants to know about the run game. No one wants Brennan Armstrong to be the leader of ball carriers again. They want Brennan Armstrong to be safe and sound with no injuries. Leading into that second half of the season, which is, yes, they're having home game, but that is a brutal ending to the season. So you want Brendan Armstrong to be healthy for those games.
Thanks for taking my question. I look forward to the first game.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll see you on ESPN in about 15
Sure
minutes.
will.
I
Now
love
that
it.
I'm giving a bath too. What's up, Mr. Lewis? T Cub, I see y'all out there. I had bath time real quick. How y'all doing?
Yeah, so we'll stay here for another 5 minutes, because I actually have bath time with my kids here in about 5-10 minutes. So so if anyone else has any questions, go ahead.
I just need a bath, period.
So Jackie, one other thing, I think the improvements that we'll see on the defensive side will be exponential.
I agree.
I think that there's more talent than people really think there is there, simply because the scheme did not fit the kids that they had last year, and so it's unfortunate that those guys really never got an opportunity to showcase. It was all about survival, and when they tried to implement that 3-3-5 in the spring, the kids were like, this is terrible. This is, so they knew the kids were saying it in the spring, and they just continue to try to force feed it. So now, and then on top of that, the kids were scared to make a mistake, and so I think what you're going to have is a coach in Coach Rudd that is really about the details. It's about the individual work and technique and all of those things with his staff. Those things will be very different than what the Virginia team experienced in the last few years, because you saw the decline every single year, and last year was just the worst thing that I'd ever seen. And so I'm excited for these kids, because they're having fun now. They love the detail. They love the fact that they're being taught the subtle nuances at their positions, on things that are going to benefit them defensively. They're being put in positions to help themselves be successful. And that is the part that was missing. And so I hear everybody saying, oh, we don't know what the defense is going to be like. We are going to be pleasantly surprised, because they're going to be fundamentally sound. They're going to be absolutely flying around, and they're going to be supporting each other. And, I can't wait to see it. I can't wait for so many people to eat crow because I don't think they really understood what those kids were missing the last few years when it came to that individual coaching and just focus.
No, I agree. I actually touched on that in the top of the show, saying how I think the defense is going to surprise a few people, and I think the defensive line is going to be one of the strengths of this team because of the depth that they have and some of the changes physically they had and what the staff did through the transfer portal. They highlighted the needs that they had, and they attacked it pretty strongly to get those guys on grounds. And I agree with you completely. And I think confidence is huge for these guys. Talking to Darius Brandt, for instance, he said they needed to work on their confidence again. Talk about mental health of student athletes. Some of these guys, were so criticized after last year. So a lot of these guys needed to work back on their confidence. And I think going back to fundamentals like they did in the spring and now here in the fall to a certain degree when you go at practice and the times that we were able to see them, going through fundamentals and making them confident in their skill set is going to be big for this group that honestly, at some point last year, I feel like, I do it on the podcast a lot where I try to humanize these student athletes because they got attacked quite frequently last year. And I think a lot of it was, they, like you said, Tony, it was a scheme that didn't fit them. These guys, they wanted to switch to a scheme where they didn't have the personnel for it. And I think what I liked about this staff is they're adjusting their scheme and they're figuring out players and moving them to positions that they fit more naturally. So rather than think so hard about where they should be, it naturally happens. So that's going to be fun to see these players finally having fun, like you said. But also, I'm going to have, talking to Anthony Johnson, I think it was during our podcast interview, he's like, I felt like the secondary was a scapegoat last year. Every time something went wrong, it was always on us, and we get it. We're the last line of defense. But at the same time, it was a lot of stuff ahead of us that was going wrong, either missed assignments or just stuff wasn't clicking. But they got a lot of most criticism. And I feel like, Anthony was saying, like, we have a chip on our shoulder this year because we want to show that we know what we're doing. We know this game. So this is definitely going to be, I think the defense is going to have something to prove, and I think they're going to do it early on.
Last question for you, Jackie, before we let you go. Thanks so much for holding this space. It's going to be talking football like this, a few weeks into the season. I agree 100% with the defense. I know, we wasn't like a full roster during the spring game, but even then, just watching the defense, I could visibly see that they just move different. They attack the football different. And with that said, I'm curious, which department on defense do you think is going to be the biggest surprise? D-line, linebacker core, or secondary?
I keep saying the D-line because I'm just really impressed with what I'm seeing there with, the addition of Cam Butler. Chico Bennett was hurt last year, so no one was able to really see what he can bring. Those two I'm really curious to see in that bandit position. I think they're going to be they can add that pressure up front. They can add that pressure up front because a lot of the stuff was going on in the secondary because at the same time, they weren't pressuring the quarterback. So they have a lot of these guys up front now that can provide that pressure, that havoc that Bronco Mendenhall was known for before last year. And, actually going after the quarterback, which will help them a lot and ease some of the tensions that we saw with the secondary. So that's why I think the D-line is going to be who I think is going to be, I don't know if it's a pleasant surprise. If you watch them, it's not going to be a surprise to you. But I think a lot of people that are not following UVA as closely will probably be pleasantly surprised about that D-line.
Hey, Jackie, could you talk a little bit about what you've picked up, and maybe Tony's picked up some of it too, that Lex Long seems to be a real interesting piece of that secondary based on his size and the way they're using that third safety position. Because he has the size to be able to almost play like a rover back and slide in around the linebackers and make some of those tough plays that we weren't able to make a year ago. Do you have a sense that that's how they're going to use him?
Yeah, I think I did see Lex Long within the twos, I believe, a little bit. On Friday, I saw him there, and I think I agree with you in how, and it's actually how you can see how what type of DBs they're recruiting kind of fits that Lex Long mold a little bit. So yeah, I could see him using that position. I think I'm more curious to see how they work the five DBs in with. I know they're happy with their DB depth, and I think there are some athletes there that I'm curious about how they use, like Lanston as well. And I'm curious to see if Antonio Clary could be one that has a breakthrough season this year. I think he was one that I thought could have a breakthrough season last year. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to do that. I think also the scheme had to a little bit to do with it as well. But I can definitely see what you're saying with that. I think he does. I think Lex does fit the scheme a little bit, and I could see him doing that Rover as well. We got time for one more question.
Oh, we can let you go ahead and get to that baby boy of yours.
It's okay. My husband's dealing with them right now. They're playing outside a little bit. It's nice. It's not as hot anymore. So I got 5 more minutes. So if anyone has any more questions.
It's good to be doing this again.
Any recruiting notes you can talk about right now? Anything, anything you want to give them?
Yeah,
I know we just
recruiting.
seen Stone commit to Duke.
Yeah,
Duke doing good.
Deshaun Stone just committed to Duke. That Duke staff has been doing a very good job on the recruiting trail. Obviously, they won 2 head-to-heads this summer with UVA, Samaj Turner and Deshaun Stone. And I think those are the ones that you have to keep an eye on. Again, they had a little bit of a head start with some of these recruits. Again, they're in-state players, just like UVA wants to keep in-state players at home. So does Duke wants to keep in-state players at home. That's what they want to do, and that's what they're telling these guys. I will say what Coach Elko has on that front, just like Coach Elliott, when he's recruiting an offensive playmaker, Coach Elko can go to these defensive playmakers and says, "I'm a defensive coach." And they really gravitate towards that. That's why you're seeing like Deshaun Stone and Samaj Turner really gravitate towards Duke. Elko is a good personality when it comes to that, and that's often what I'm hearing about them. UVA right now, the name that they're going to take a smaller class now. They're not going to. I would imagine their class is going to be between 15 and 17. That's about it. So their class is almost there. So that's why you don't have the sense of panic, because their class is almost full. But I imagine them they have Amari Thomas, and they also have Tyler Coleman, who was one of their recent in-state commitments. They're recruiting him as an athlete, but I can see him be as a wide receiver or DB, but I can see him right now as being a wide receiver target. He's a little bit more raw on the DB side. He hasn't had many reps on that side of the ball, which he's going to try to do more fall. But they want to get probably like 4 wide receivers in total, maybe even 5. So I would say the receiver is where I could see new offers go out. Although if you're one who's 24/7 subscriber, you know that there's one receiver who's trying to lock in a official visit. So if he locks in official visit, and I think UVA is one of the favorites right now to land him, that would mean they would have 3 technically committed. So they would probably go 1 or 2 left. It kind of depends. And they also, although there's some players committed elsewhere right now, you always have to keep an eye out on them and always leave a spot or 2 for these 4-star guys or upper 3-star guys that may be still looking at your school. So I would keep an eye out on that as the season progresses, especially if you have a successful season on the field. You're probably going to see some rumblings around a few committed players committed elsewhere that UVA will still recruit. So, because it is what it is. You're never fully committed until you sign that dotted line, and everyone does this. So I think when you're looking at UVA's class, you always leave 1 spot or 2 spots for those guys. You're still recruiting until the bitter end. But I would watch out for 1 or 2 wide receivers for Virginia to add in this class. Thanks again for everyone that came onto the Twitter space. Even if you didn't ask a question, it's just nice to interact with the UVA fan base. And I hope to do more of those Twitter spaces moving forward. But I also hope to do some live Q&As on a YouTube channel as well. So keep an eye out that, and I'll make sure to give you guys a heads up on when we plan to do those. Most likely it will be towards when the season starts. We'll definitely have a couple recruiting ones coming up, and I'll make sure to have some experts joining us like Brian Doan, the recruiting analyst out of the East. just so we can weigh in on what's going on in the recruiting front as well for Virginia. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us on the Twitter space. And we'll most likely have one more before the season starts. But again, I will give you guys a heads up, and you can just follow me at JackieFriend_ so that you can be a part of the Twitter space as well. We will continue our coverage from fall camp throughout the rest of this week and going through the rest of August before the first week of game coverage. So make sure you keep following us on Wahoo's 24/7. And if you like what you're hearing through the podcast, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your episodes. And also, why don't you go ahead and review and rate us on Apple and on Spotify. So thanks again, everybody. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your week.